The elevator jolted to a violent halt between floors 47 and 48, and I knew, with absolute, gut-wrenching certainty, that my life had just cleaved into before and after. The emergency lights flickered once, twice, then settled into a dim, amber glow that painted everything in fever dream hues. Which felt appropriate, really, because my skin was actually on fire. Sweat soaked through the back of my cream silk blouse, plastering the fabric to my spine, and my hands trembled so violently I could barely maintain my grip on the folder I'd been clutching like a lifeline since I stepped into this godforsaken elevator. The folder. Right. The urgent documents requiring the CEO's signature. The reason I, a quiet, unremarkable junior accountant who had spent 3 years perfecting the art of invisibility at Sterling Technologies, had been forced into the executive lift. The regular elevators were all undergoing maintenance, my supervisor had assured me. It would be fine, she'd said. Just get the signature and come right back. She hadn't mentioned that the Ashford twins would be in the elevator. She hadn't mentioned that they would be standing on opposite sides of the car, both in impeccably tailored charcoal suits, both turning to look at me with those identical storm gray eyes as the doors slid shut, and that something in the air between them would feel like walking into a wall of static electricity. I'd kept my eyes fixed on the floor numbers above the door. 44, 45, 46. Just a few more floors. Just survive a few more minutes. But then my skin had started to prickle with heat, and my heart had begun hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and by the time we hit the 47th floor, I was dizzy and nauseous, and something warm and terrifying was pooling low in my belly, spreading outward like wildfire through my veins. And now the elevator had stopped, and I was trapped with them. Fuck, I heard myself whisper, my voice cracking on the word. The folder slipped from my fingers, papers scattering across the floor in a fan of white. I pressed my back against the cold metal wall, trying to ground myself, trying to remember how to breathe, but every inhale brought more of their scent into my lungs, and every exhale seemed to carry more of whatever was happening to me out into the cramped space. They smelled like rain-soaked cedar and wood smoke and something darker underneath, something that made my mouth water and my body ache in ways I'd never experienced. It was overwhelming. It was intoxicating. It was absolutely, terrifyingly wrong because I was a beta. I had always been a beta. Betas didn't react to alpha pheromones like this. Betas didn't. Oh God. I looked down at my hands, at the way they were trembling, at the flesh creeping up my arms beneath the rolled-up sleeves of my blouse. I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, trickling down the back of my neck and lower in places that made mortification burn hotter than the heat already consuming me. Something was happening. Something I didn't understand. Are you all right? The voice came from my left, smooth and measured, and it took me a moment to realize it was one of them. The one they called the CEO. Vivian. I'd heard the whispers about her in the break room, cold, calculating, a woman who could dismantle a competitor with a single phone call and never lose her composure. She sounded calm now, but there was an edge underneath, something sharp and watchful that made my skin prickle with awareness. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something normal, something professional, but what came out was a broken sound, half gasp, half whimper, and I watched her expression shift in real time. Her nostrils flared almost imperceptibly, and those storm gray eyes, which had been merely assessing a moment before, suddenly sharpened into something far more dangerous. Vivian, the other voice said. Sloane. The CFO. The one they said could charm the skin off a snake and make it thank her for the privilege. Her voice was rougher now, lower, with a tension that hadn't been there before. Do you smell that? Silence stretched for 3 agonizing heartbeats. Then Vivian said, very quietly, yes. I didn't understand what they were talking about. My brain felt thick and slow, like it was wading through honey. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming, hyper-aware of the recycled air moving across my sweat-slicked skin, of the subtle shift of fabric against my thighs, of the way my legs were trembling so badly I wasn't sure they would hold me much longer. "You need to sit down," Sloane said, and there was something careful in her tone now, something that sounded almost like she was talking to a spooked animal. "Before you fall down." She was right. My knees were giving out. I slid down the wall, the metal cool against my burning skin, and ended up on the floor in a heap of crumpled paperwork and shaking limbs. I drew my knees up to my chest, wrapped my arms around them, and tried to make myself as small as possible. It didn't help. Nothing helped. The heat was building again, a wave of it crashing through me so intensely that I actually whimpered out loud. I could feel it in my bones, in the marrow, in places I didn't even know I had nerve endings. And beneath the heat, there was something else. Something that felt like emptiness. Like hunger. Like a need so profound it made my vision blur at the edges. "Please," I managed, hating how weak my voice sounded. "Please, I don't know what's happening to me. I broke off, because I didn't know what I needed. I just knew I needed something. Something that would make this stop. Something that would fill the aching void that had opened up inside me." Sloane was moving before Vivian could stop her, crossing the distance between them in 3 quick strides. She crouched down in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off her body, close enough that I could see the fine tremor running through her hands as she held them up in a gesture of peace. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey, look at me. Can you look at me?" I dragged my gaze up to her face. Up close, she was even more devastating. Sharp jaw, jet black hair cut in a sleek bob that framed her angular features, and those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense I had. Her scent was stronger here, rain cedar and smoke, and something uniquely her, and I found myself leaning toward her without conscious thought. "There you go," she murmured. "That's good. Just breathe for me, okay? Slow and steady." I gasped. "I can't breathe." It's another wave of heat crashed through me, and I doubled over, pressing my forehead to my knees. The slick was getting worse now, soaking through my clothes, and the shame of it made tears prick at the corners of my eyes. Something's wrong. Something's really wrong. I think I need a hospital. Madeline. Vivian's voice cut through the haze, sharp and commanding. "Look at me." I lifted my head and found her standing over us, her expression unreadable, but her eyes blazing with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You're not sick," she said flatly. "You're an Omega. And unless I'm very much mistaken, this is your first heat." The words hit me like a physical blow. I shook my head, even as my body screamed the truth at me with every pulse of need. "That's impossible. I'm 26 years old. If I were an Omega, I would have presented years ago." "Late presentation is rare," Vivian agreed. "But it happens. Usually triggered by extreme stress or prolonged proximity to a highly compatible alpha." She paused, and something dark flickered across her face. "Or in this case, 2 compatible alphas whose combined pheromones have just activated everything your body has been suppressing." "No." I shook my head harder, denial the only thing I could cling to. "No, that's not, I can't be. I've never." "You've never what?" Sloane asked gently. "Felt like this before? Been so hot it hurts? Had your body respond to someone's scent like it's the only thing keeping you alive?" I stared at her, and she was right. She was absolutely right. I'd spent 26 years believing I was a beta, and the only frame of reference I had was what I'd read in books and heard from other people. I'd never experienced heat. I'd never felt pheromones. I'd never been around alphas like this. But the proof was there, in the slick soaking through my clothes, in the desperate ache that had taken up residence in my core, in the way my body was literally crying out for something only they could provide. "What do I do?" I whispered. "What happens now?" Vivian knelt down, positioning herself on my other side so that I was bracketed between them. Her presence was solid and grounding, even as the heat of her body made my skin prickle with awareness. "Your body needs an alpha," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "More specifically, it needs an alpha's pheromones to help regulate your system and bring the heat under control. Without that, you're going to be in significant distress for the next several hours. Possibly days." I flinched. "Days? This is your first heat," Sloane said, her voice softer. "They're always the worst. Your body has no idea what it's doing, and it's going to keep escalating until it gets what it needs." "And what does it need?" I asked, even though I already knew. I could feel the truth of it in every cell of my body, in the way I was instinctively leaning toward them, in the way my mouth watered at the thought of their skin against mine. Vivian's gaze met her sister's across my head, and some silent communication passed between them. "Options," Vivian said, returning her attention to me. "We have options. Option 1, you refuse our help. We all suffer through this together until the elevator is operational again. You'll be in significant pain. We'll be fighting our instincts every second. And there's a risk you could go into a dangerous fever state if your heat continues to escalate unchecked." I swallowed hard. "Option 2. Option 2, she continued, you allow us to help you through the initial crisis using touch and pheromones to ease the symptoms without full mating. Option 3. She hesitated, and Sloane picked up the thread. "Option 3, you accept what your body is asking for, and let us take care of you properly. No holding back. No half measures. We're your alphas, Madeline. If you want us to be." The words should have terrified me. Instead, they sent a pulse of desperate want straight through me, and I felt more slick flood between my thighs at the very thought. I managed, hating how my voice broke on the word. "I can't just, you're my bosses. This is wrong. I just need to wait for the elevator to start working again, and then I can go home and deal with this myself." Sloane made a rough sound low in her throat. "Madeline, look at me. I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it clearly. Your first heat, hitting this hard, this fast, without any preparation, without suppressants or a plan, if you try to ride this out alone, you could end up hospitalized. Or worse. Your body needs an alpha right now. It's not about want. It's biology. Both of you need to stay away from me," I said desperately, pressing myself harder against the wall. "Your pheromones are making it worse." Vivian's expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten. Then, unexpectedly, she did something I wasn't prepared for. She shifted back, deliberately putting as much distance between us as the small space allowed, and began releasing waves of calm, soothing pheromones that felt like cool water on burned skin. "Breathe," she instructed quietly. "Focus on my voice. We're not going to touch you without permission. But Sloane is right about one thing. Your scent is already affecting us both, and the longer we're trapped here, the harder it's going to be for all three of us to maintain control." "What does that mean?" I asked, though part of me already knew. "It means," Sloane said, her voice rougher than before, "that you're throwing off mating pheromones strong enough to trigger rut in any alpha within range. We're both fighting it right now, but we won't be able to fight it forever." The words should have terrified me. Instead, some dark, treacherous part of me that I'd never known existed responded with a pulse of desperate need. My body didn't care about propriety or power dynamics. My body only understood that two compatible alphas were right here, and I was burning alive with a need that only they could satisfy. A whimper escaped my throat, high and pleading, the kind of sound I'd never made before in my life. I watched both of them react instantly. Muscles tensed. Eyes flashed with something primal and possessive. Vivian's careful control wavered for just a moment, her pheromones spiking hot and demanding before she ruthlessly locked them down again. Sloane's hands clenched into fists at her sides, and I could see the tension in every line of her body. "I'm sorry," I gasped out, mortified. "I'm so sorry. I can't control it. I don't know how to make it stop." "Don't apologize," Vivian said, and her voice had gone rough despite her obvious efforts to remain calm. "This isn't your fault. You couldn't have known this would happen." "But it is happening," Sloane added, taking another step closer despite her sister's warning look. "And we need to decide right now how we're going to handle the next however many minutes, because Madeline, with all due respect, you smell absolutely divine, and I'm about 5 minutes away from losing my goddamn mind." The blunt honesty of it sent another wave of heat through me, stronger this time, powerful enough to make my vision swim. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to think through the fog of need, trying to make a rational decision when my entire body was screaming for relief. "Option 2, I whispered finally. "Touch and pheromones. Nothing more. And you have to promise me, this doesn't leave this elevator. Tomorrow morning, we all go back to normal like this never happened." Silence stretched for several heartbeats. Then Sloane said quietly, "We can't promise normal, Madeline. Because after this, nothing between us is going to be the same. But we can promise discretion and respect. Whatever happens here stays between the three of us." Vivian nodded her agreement. "And if at any point you want us to stop, you only have to say the word." "Understood." I nodded shakily, then realized they needed verbal confirmation. "Yes. Understood. Please. I need help. It's getting worse." Sloane moved first, crossing the space between us with predatory grace. She knelt beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her body, but still not touching. Up close, her pheromones were overwhelming rain cedar and smoke, and something uniquely her that made my mouth water, and my body arched toward her instinctively. "Easy," she murmured, reaching out slowly to brush sweat-dampened hair back from my forehead. Her fingers were cool against my burning skin, and the simple touch made me gasp and lean into her palm. "You're doing so well, Madeline. We're going to take care of you." Vivian moved to my other side, and suddenly I was bracketed between them, surrounded by alpha pheromones that both soothed and inflamed. When Vivian's hand settled on my shoulder, steady and grounding, something inside me relaxed fractionally even as my needs spiraled higher. "Tell us what you need," Vivian said, her voice pitched low and calming. "We'll follow your lead." "I don't know," I admitted desperately. "I've never felt anything like this. Everything hurts and burns and aches, and I can't think straight, and I need something, but I don't know what." Sloane's hand slid from my forehead down to cut my jaw, tilting my face toward hers. Her gray eyes had darkened almost to black, but her touch remained gentle. "Your body knows what it needs," she said softly. "You just have to let go and trust it. Trust us." The word trust should have been laughable, given the circumstances. But something in her tone, in the careful way both of them were handling me despite the obvious effort it cost them, made me want to believe. I nodded slightly, and that small surrender seemed to break something open between us. Sloane leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away, and pressed her lips to my forehead. The kiss was chaste, almost sweet, but my entire body lit up like she'd touched a live wire to my skin. I arched against her with a desperate sound, and her arm came around my waist, pulling me firmly against her chest. "That's it," she murmured against my temple. "Let us in. Stop fighting it." Vivian's hand moved from my shoulder to the back of my neck, fingers pressing into the tense muscles there, and the combination of both of them touching me, surrounding me with their scent and their solid presence, made my mind go blissfully quiet for the first time since the heat started. The pain didn't disappear, but it transformed into something else, something almost pleasurable in its intensity. I found myself turning into Sloane's embrace, pressing my face against her neck, breathing in great gulps of her scent. She held me tighter, one hand stroking slow circles on my back, while the other cradled the back of my head. Behind me, Vivian shifted closer until I was sandwiched between them, her chest against my back, her breath warm against my ear. "Good," Vivian said quietly. "Your heart rate is stabilizing. How does this feel?" "Safe," I whispered, surprising myself with the honesty. "It feels safe." Both of them went very still at that. Then Sloane's arms tightened fractionally, and Vivian pressed her forehead against the back of my head. For several moments, we just stayed like that, breathing together in the dim emergency lighting. The heat was still there, still burning through me, but it was more manageable now. Less like drowning and more like being held steady in a strong current. But the heat wasn't satisfied with simple comfort. Another wave built inside me, stronger than before, and this time when it crested, I couldn't hold back the whimper of need that tore from my throat. My hips rocked forward instinctively, seeking friction, seeking pressure, seeking anything that would ease the empty ache. "Madeline," Vivian said, her voice strained. "We need to know how far you want this to go. Because your scent is getting stronger, and we're both very close to losing control." "I can smell it on you too," Sloane added, her lips brushing the shell of my ear as she spoke. "You're producing so much slick you're soaking through your clothes. And every instinct I have is screaming at me to pin you down and give you what you need." The raw honesty should have shocked me, but instead, it sent a fresh wave of heat through my body. I squirmed against Sloane, feeling the evidence of her desire pressing against my hip through layers of fabric, and the knowledge that I was affecting her this strongly made me feel powerful even in the midst of my vulnerability. "Touch me," I heard myself beg. "Please. I need more. I need your hands on me." "Where?" Vivian asked, her hand sliding from my neck down my spine. "Tell us where you need us." "Everywhere," I gasped out. "I don't care. Just please don't stop touching me." They moved in perfect synchronization, as if they'd done this together before. Sloane's hands found the hem of my blouse and slipped underneath, her palms sliding up my ribs to splay across my chest. The contact made me arch with a sharp cry, my sensitive skin erupting in goosebumps. Behind me, Vivian's hands gripped my hips, pulling me back against her so I could feel every inch of her pressing against the curve of my backside. She rolled her hips slowly, creating friction that made stars explode behind my closed eyelids, while her mouth found the side of my neck and began placing hot, open-mouthed kisses along the tendon. "So responsive," Sloane murmured, her thumbs brushing across the tight peaks of my chest through the thin fabric of my undershirt. "Every touch makes you shake. Do you have any idea how beautiful you look right now, Madeline? Completely undone for us." I couldn't form words anymore, could only make desperate sounds as they continued their coordinated assault on my senses. Vivian's teeth scraped lightly over my pulse point, not breaking skin, but applying just enough pressure to send a jolt of pleasure pain straight through me. Her hands moved from my hips to my thighs, spreading my legs wider so Sloane could press closer, so I was opened and exposed between them. The position made me acutely aware of how much slick I was producing, how it had soaked through my clothes, how the scent of it filled the elevator until we were all breathing nothing but heat and need and omega desire. Sloane groaned against my collarbone, her hips grinding forward until the evidence of her need pressed directly against where I was aching and empty. "Madeline," she said raggedly, if you want us to stop, you need to tell us right now. Because I'm about 30 seconds away from losing every shred of control I have." The image her words painted made my entire body clench with want. I should have been terrified. I should have said stop. Instead, I rolled my hips against her and whispered, "Yes." Both of them froze. "Yes," Vivian repeated, her voice dangerous and low. "Yes to what specifically, Omega?" "We need to hear you say it." The title Omega, spoken in that possessive tone, shattered the last of my resistance. "I need you," I gasped out. "Both of you. Please. I'm burning alive, and nothing else is going to make it stop. For one suspended heartbeat, no one moved. Then Vivian cursed roughly, and her hands moved to the waistband of my trousers, popping the button with practiced ease. Sloane captured my mouth in a kiss that was anything but gentle, her tongue sweeping inside to taste and claim while her hands worked to strip my blouse over my head. They undressed me with frantic efficiency, mouths and hands never leaving my skin for longer than necessary, until I was naked and trembling between them while they were both still fully clothed. The vulnerability of it should have bothered me, but instead it felt right, like this was exactly where I belonged. Vivian's hand slid between my legs from behind, fingers tracing through the copious slick coating my thighs, and the exploratory touch made me cry out and arch. So ready, she murmured appreciatively. You're going to take us so perfectly, Omega. Sloane's mouth moved from my lips down to my throat, teeth scraping over the sensitive scent gland there, and the threat of a claiming bite made my inner muscles clench around nothing. Not yet, she said against my skin, reading my body's response. We're not mating you in a broken elevator on a first heat, no matter how much you're begging for it. Then what? I managed to gasp as Vivian's fingers circled my entrance, teasing but not entering. Then we're going to make you forget every reason you had to be afraid, Vivian said calmly and slid one long finger inside me. The stretch burned and felt perfect and nowhere near enough all at once. I pushed back against her hand, trying to take more, and felt Sloane's grip tighten on my hips to hold me still. Patience, Sloane said, though her own voice was shaking with the effort of control. Vivian's going to open you up slowly. Make sure you're ready. And while she does that, you're going to come apart on my hands and my mouth until that beautiful body stops shaking. She knelt in front of me, and the sight of this powerful alpha on her knees, her hands spreading my thighs wider, her eyes locked on where I was most vulnerable, nearly made me shatter from visual alone. When she leaned forward and her mouth found me, I stopped breathing entirely. The pleasure was instantaneous and overwhelming, crashing through me in waves as Sloane's clever tongue found every sensitive spot and Vivian worked a second finger inside me, stretching me carefully. They played my body like a perfectly tuned instrument, learning my responses, adjusting their rhythm until I was sobbing with pleasure and desperate need. My first peak built fast and hit hard, ripping through me with enough force to make my vision white out. I might have screamed, I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I shattered completely while Vivian's fingers worked me through it and Sloane's mouth stayed sealed over me, drinking down everything I gave her. Before I could fully recover, they shifted positions. Vivian sat with her back against the elevator wall and pulled me into her lap, my back against her chest, her thighs spreading mine impossibly wide. Sloane remained kneeling between my legs, and when Vivian's fingers withdrew, Sloane's mouth immediately replaced them, pressing inside me in a way that made me shake with overstimulation. Too much, I whimpered, even as my hips rolled against Sloane's face. I can't. It's too much. You can, Vivian said against my ear, her hands coming up to palm my chest, fingers rolling and tugging in rhythm with Sloane's mouth. And you will, because your body needs this. Needs us to work you through the heat until it breaks. How many? I gasped. How many times do I need to? As many as it takes, Sloane said, pulling back just long enough to meet my eyes, her lips glistening. Until your fever breaks and you can think clearly again. Could be 5. Could be 10. Could be 20. We're not stopping until you're satisfied, Omega. The promise in her words sent me spiraling toward another peak, this one built slower, but crashed harder, rolling through me in endless waves as Sloane sealed her mouth over me again and Vivian's fingers continued their relentless attention to my chest. I came apart between them, my body no longer my own, belonging entirely to the pleasure they were wringing from me. Time lost all meaning in that elevator. I stopped trying to count, stopped trying to maintain any sense of control or dignity. They took me apart systematically, learning every sound I made, every place that made me shake, every touch that pushed me higher. At some point, Sloane stripped off her blazer and shirt because I was clawing at them, and the feel of her bare chest against my trembling thighs made me shatter again just from the skin contact. Vivian remained fully clothed, though I could feel her considerable desire pressed hard against my lower back, could hear the strain in her breathing, could sense the iron control it was taking her not to simply flip me over and claim me the way her alpha instincts were demanding. Instead, she held me steady, murmured praise and encouragement, kept me grounded even as Sloane drove me to heights of pleasure I hadn't known existed. "Please," I finally sobbed, after what might have been the 7th or 8th peak. "Please, I need more. I need you to take me properly. I can't take any more like this." Sloane pulled back, her face flushed and her sleek hair disheveled, my scent coating her jaw and neck. "Madeline," she said carefully, "if we do this properly, there's no going back. You'll be tied to us at least temporarily. Your body will recognize us as your alphas. Are you sure that's what you want?" "I don't care," I said desperately. "I don't care about tomorrow or consequences or anything except making this ache stop. Please. I'm begging you." The twins exchanged another one of those wordless communications, then Vivian shifted me carefully off her lap and stood, removing her blazer and beginning to unbutton her silk blouse with deliberate movements. "You'll have us both," she said calmly. "One at a time. Sloane first, since she's been the one working so hard to prepare you. Then me. And when we're done, Madeline, you're going to understand exactly what it means to belong to the Ashford twins." The possessive certainty in her voice made my entire body clench with anticipation. Sloane was already removing her belt, her trousers, revealing miles of toned muscle and the heavy evidence of how long she'd been holding back. She positioned herself between my spread thighs, one hand braced beside my head, the other guiding herself to where I was most desperate for her. Our eyes locked as she began to press forward, slow and steady, stretching me inch by torturous inch. The burn was intense, riding the knife edge between pleasure and pain, but my heat-soaked body welcomed the intrusion, producing more slick to ease her way. "Breathe," she coached quietly, her own breathing ragged. "You're taking me so well, Omega. Just a little more." When she finally settled fully inside me, we both went still, overwhelmed by the sensation of being joined so completely. I could feel everything, every tremor running through her muscular frame as she fought the urge to move. "Perfect," she groaned. "You feel absolutely perfect wrapped around me." Then she began to move, long slow strokes that dragged against every sensitive spot inside me, building a pleasure so intense it bordered on unbearable. I wrapped my legs around her waist, pulling her deeper, and the change in angle made both of us cry out. Vivian appeared in my peripheral vision, now as naked as her sister. She knelt beside us, one hand tangling in my hair to tilt my head toward her. "Open," she commanded, and when I obeyed, she filled my mouth. The dual sensation of being claimed at both ends, of serving both alphas simultaneously, sent me into another peak so powerful I nearly blacked out. My body clamped down on Sloane like a vice, and she shouted something incomprehensible as her rhythm faltered. "Going to knot you," she managed to gasp out. "Madeline, I'm going to knot you now. Are you ready?" I couldn't answer with Vivian in my mouth, but I moaned my consent around her and felt the moment Sloane's knot began to swell. The stretch was enormous, almost too much, but then it locked into place and she was pressing against that perfect spot inside me, and I was shattering again, my body clenching around her as she poured everything into me. We stayed locked together while Vivian continued her measured rhythm, her gray eyes never leaving my face, watching every expression of pleasure that crossed my features. When she reached her own peak, She pulled back enough to let me breathe, marking my chest and throat with her scent. The three of us collapsed in a tangle of sweaty limbs, Sloane still buried inside me, Vivian's arm draped possessively across both of us. My heat had finally broken, the desperate fever giving way to a bone-deep satisfaction and exhaustion. For the first time in hours, my mind felt clear. "Oh God," I whispered into the charged silence. "What did we just do?" Vivian's hand found mine, lacing our fingers together. "We helped you through your first heat," she said simply, "and found our omega in the process." The elevator suddenly lurched back to life, with a cheerful ding that felt wildly inappropriate given what had just happened. The lights brightened to full strength, and the car began its smooth ascent toward the 48th floor. Panic seized me as I realized we were all still very naked and very compromised. Sloane was still knotted inside me, wouldn't be able to pull out for at least another 10 minutes, and Vivian's scent marked me so thoroughly that anyone with a functioning nose would know exactly what had happened in this elevator. "Don't panic," Sloane said, reading my expression. "This elevator opens directly into our private office suite. No one else has access to this floor." The doors opened to reveal exactly what she'd promised, a luxurious reception area, completely empty of people. Vivian stood smoothly, her alpha recovery already in effect, and began gathering our scattered clothes. She tossed Sloane's shirt to her sister, who draped it over us to preserve some modesty even though we were alone. When the knot finally released, I gasped at the sudden emptiness and the flood of combined release that followed. Sloane lifted me carefully into her arms, her strength making me feel small and protected, and carried me through the reception area into what was clearly a private suite beyond. The room held a massive desk, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a door that opened to reveal a full bathroom with a shower large enough for 3. They took turns cleaning me gently, washing away the evidence of our encounter with careful hands and soft murmurs of praise. When we emerged, Vivian had laid out fresh clothes on the leather sofa, simple items that must have been kept on hand for emergencies. I dressed slowly, my body pleasantly sore in ways I'd never experienced, my mind still struggling to process everything that had happened. "Madeline," Vivian said quietly, drawing my attention. "We need to talk about what happens next." I stared at her, my heart suddenly pounding for entirely different reasons than it had been in the elevator. The reality of what had just happened was crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I had just been intimate with both of my bosses, the most powerful women in the company, the twin alphas who could fire me with a single word. What had I been thinking? "I wasn't thinking," I said quietly, wrapping my arms around myself despite the fresh clothes. "I was in heat. None of this would have happened if I'd been in my right mind. I should leave. I should go home right now, and we can all pretend this never happened." Sloane emerged from the bathroom, also dressed now in casual clothes that somehow made her look even more devastatingly attractive than the tailored suit had. She leaned against the door frame, her gray eyes serious. "Is that really what you want, Madeline? To pretend none of this happened? What else can we do?" I asked, frustration making my voice sharper than intended. "You're both my bosses. This was a biological accident, nothing more. Tomorrow morning, I have to come back to work and face everyone, knowing that I couldn't even finish the sentence." Vivian moved closer, but stopped just out of touching distance, respecting my obvious need for space. "Madeline," she said calmly, "what happened in that elevator wasn't just biology. Yes, your heat triggered our response. But the compatibility between the three of us, that level of resonance, it doesn't happen randomly." "What are you saying?" I whispered. "I'm saying," Sloane answered, pushing off from the door frame, "that you're our mate. Both of ours. The way your body responded to us, the way our pheromones calmed you instantly, the way holding you felt like coming home, that's not just heat fever. That's fate." I shook my head frantically. "You can't possibly know that after one encounter." This is insane. I need to go home. I need time to think clearly. Then go home, Vivian said, surprising me. We're not going to force you to stay or accept anything you're not ready for. But Madeline, she stepped closer, close enough that I could feel her body heat. You need to understand something. After today, after we've been inside you, after we've tasted you and held you through your first heat, there's no going back to normal. Our alphas have claimed you, whether you accept it or not. The possessive certainty in her tone sent a shiver through me that was equal parts fear and arousal. I need time, I said firmly. Please. Just give me some space to process all of this. They exchanged another one of those silent communications, then Sloane nodded slowly. Okay, we'll give you space. But Madeline, you're not coming back to work tomorrow. You need at least 3 days to recover from your first heat, and you'll need proper food and rest. We'll have everything you need delivered to your apartment. I don't need you to take care of me, I protested weakly. Yes, Vivian said flatly. You do. You're our Omega now, whether you've accepted it yet or not. And we take care of what's ours. Before I could argue further, she called for her driver to take me home. The ride passed in a blur, my mind spinning with everything that had happened, my body still carrying the evidence of their touch, their scent embedded so deeply in my skin that no amount of showering would remove it. My tiny studio apartment felt smaller than ever when I finally stumbled inside. I collapsed onto my bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the impossible situation I'd found myself in. Hours ago, I'd been a beta accountant living a quiet, unremarkable life. Now I was an Omega who had been claimed by the two most powerful alphas in the city. Sleep should have been impossible, but my body, exhausted from the heat and the intense physical activity, pulled me under almost immediately. I dreamed of storm gray eyes and rainseeder pheromones, of strong hands holding me steady and deep voices murmuring praise. I woke the next morning to insistent knocking on my door. When I opened it, I found a delivery person struggling under the weight of multiple bags and boxes. Delivery for Madeline, she said cheerfully, pushing past me into the apartment before I could protest. She unpacked everything with efficient speed. Fresh food, enough for several days, high-quality supplements designed specifically for Omegas recovering from heat, soft blankets and pillows saturated with alpha pheromones. Vivian and Sloane's scent woven through the fabric, a beautiful arrangement of white peonies with a card that simply read, "Take all the time you need. We'll be here when you're ready." After she left, I stood in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by evidence of their care, and felt something crack open in my chest. They weren't pushing. They weren't demanding. They were simply showing me through actions that they meant what they said about taking care of their Omega. The next 3 days passed in a strange haze of recovery and reflection. My body healed quickly, the soreness fading into pleasant memory. My mind, however, remained in turmoil. I couldn't stop thinking about them, couldn't stop replaying every touch, every word, every moment of connection. I tried to convince myself it was just residual heat hormones, just my Omega biology clinging to the alphas who had helped me through my first cycle. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. I spent hours researching late presentation, reading everything I could find about Omegas who presented in adulthood. The stories were remarkably similar to mine, a triggering event, usually proximity to a compatible alpha, followed by an intense first heat that often resulted in bonding. The scientific articles talked about biological imperatives and pheromone compatibility, but the personal accounts spoke of something deeper. They talked about finding home, about pieces of themselves they hadn't known were missing suddenly clicking into place. On the second night, my phone rang. Sloane's name flashed on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Madeline, her voice came through, warm and concerned. "How are you feeling?" "Better," I said honestly. "The supplements are helping. Thank you for sending everything." "Of course," she replied. We'd do anything for you. There was a pause, then, I miss you. We both do. The penthouse feels empty without you. Something in my chest twisted at the vulnerability in her voice. I miss you too, I admitted quietly. Both of you. I didn't expect to, but I do. Then come back to us, she said softly. Not to work. Not to any situation you're uncomfortable with. Just come see us. Let us cook you dinner, talk with you. No pressure, no expectations. Just us. I found myself agreeing before I'd fully thought it through. Okay, tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, she confirmed, and I could hear the smile in her voice. I'll send a car for you at 7. After we hung up, I sat on my couch, wrapped in one of the blankets they'd sent, breathing in their combined scents, and admitted to myself what I'd been denying for 3 days. I didn't want to walk away from this. I didn't want to pretend it never happened. I wanted to see where this connection could go, consequences be damned. The next evening, I dressed carefully in simple but nice clothes, my hands shaking slightly as I tried to calm my nerves. The car arrived precisely at 7, and the driver greeted me with a knowing smile that made me blush. The ride to their penthouse took 20 minutes through evening traffic, 20 minutes for my anxiety to build and my second thoughts to multiply. But the moment Sloane opened the door, all my nervousness evaporated. She looked at me like I was the most precious thing she'd ever seen, and before I could say a word, she pulled me into a tight embrace. Thank you for coming, she murmured against my hair. You have no idea how much we needed to see you. Vivian appeared from the kitchen, an apron tied around her waist, looking adorably domestic in a way that seemed at odds with her usual corporate persona. Madeline, she said, her face lighting up. Perfect timing. Dinner's almost ready. The evening unfolded with surprising ease. They'd prepared my favorite foods, dishes I'd mentioned in passing during business meetings months ago that I was shocked they remembered. We ate at their huge dining table, but the atmosphere was intimate, warm, nothing like the formal dinners I'd imagined taking place in this space. After dinner, we moved to the living room. I sat between them on the massive sectional sofa, and we really talked, about everything and nothing. They asked about my childhood, my dreams, my fears. I learned about their complicated family history, the pressure of building an empire at such a young age, the loneliness of being at the top with no one they could truly trust. I never thought I'd find someone who could handle both of us, Vivian admitted at one point. We're not easy women, Madeline. We're demanding, possessive, and we don't do anything halfway. Are you trying to scare me off? I asked, though there was no real heat in the question. No, Sloane said, taking my hand. We're trying to be honest. If this is going to work, you need to know what you're signing up for. We want you, Madeline. Not just as an omega, not just for the physical compatibility. We want all of you. The quiet accountant who notices details everyone else misses. The kind person who always holds the door for others. The beautiful woman who blushes when she's flustered. I felt tears prick at my eyes. No one had ever seen me so clearly before, had ever made me feel so completely known and accepted. I want to try, I said softly. I don't know if I'm ready for everything yet, but I want to see where this goes. The relief on both their faces was palpable. We can go as slow as you need, Vivian promised. We'll follow your lead. That night, they asked me to stay. Not for anything physical, just to sleep between them, to let our bond strengthen through proximity and shared rest. I agreed, and found myself once again wrapped in their warmth, their scents surrounding me, their steady breathing lulling me into the best sleep I'd had in days. I woke the next morning to soft sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and Sloane's arm draped over my waist. Vivian was already awake, propped up on one elbow, watching me with an expression so tender it made my breath catch. Good morning, she said quietly, not wanting to wake her sister. Good morning, I whispered back. This feels surreal. A week ago, I didn't even know I was an omega. Now I'm waking up in my boss's bed. A small smile played at her lips. Are we still your bosses, Madeline? Or are we something more now? I thought about it for a moment. Something more, I decided. Definitely something more. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a rhythm. I still lived in my apartment, needing that space to maintain some independence, but I spent most evenings at the penthouse. They courted me properly, taking turns planning elaborate dates. Vivian took me to art galleries and symphony concerts, showing me a world of culture I'd never had access to before. Sloane preferred more adventurous outings, rock climbing and sailing, pushing me out of my comfort zone in ways that were terrifying and exhilarating. But the best moments were the simple ones. Cooking together in their massive kitchen, playfully arguing over who got to chop vegetables. Movie nights where we'd debate the merits of various films. Quiet mornings where I'd wake between them and just exist in that perfect peace. The physical intimacy returned gradually. A heated kiss in the kitchen that left me breathless. Sloane's hands sliding under my shirt while we watched a movie. Vivian pulling me into the shower with her one morning and spending an hour exploring my body with nothing but soap and warm water. Each encounter built on the last, but they never pushed for more than I was ready to give. At work, things had shifted as well. Vivian and Sloane had sat down with HR to formally disclose our relationship. I was transferred to a different department with a promotion that came with it, ensuring no one could claim favoritism while also recognizing my actual skills. The gossip, predictably, was intense. The Omega who tamed the Ashford twins became my unofficial title in the break rooms. Some people were supportive, genuinely happy that I'd found compatible alphas. Others were jealous, making snide comments about sleeping my way to the top. But I learned quickly to tune it out, focusing instead on my work and the relationship I was building. 3 months after the elevator incident, I came home to my apartment after a long day to find both Vivian and Sloane waiting outside my door. We need to talk, Vivian said, her expression serious. My heart sank. Those words never meant anything good. Okay, I said quietly, unlocking the door and letting them inside. Once we were all seated, Sloane took my hand. Madeline, we've been patient. We've given you space and time to adjust. But we need to know where this is going. What do you mean? I asked, though I had a feeling I knew. We mean, Vivian said directly, that we want you to move in with us. Officially. Permanently. We want you to be ours completely, not just someone we see in the evenings. I felt panic flutter in my chest. That's a big step. I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. When will you be ready? Sloane asked, frustration creeping into her voice. It's been 3 months, Madeline. We've been more than patient. But our alphas are going crazy only having you part-time. We need more. I stood up, pacing across my small living room. You're pushing me. You promised you'd let me set the pace. And you're running, Vivian said bluntly, standing as well. Every time we get close to something real, something permanent, you pull back. What are you so afraid of? I'm afraid of losing myself, I snapped, rounding on them. I'm afraid of becoming just another possession for you to own. I'm afraid that if I give you everything, there won't be anything left of me. The words hung in the air between us, raw and honest. Sloane stood slowly, moving toward me carefully like I was a wild animal that might bolt. Madeline, she said softly. We don't want to own you. We want to love you. There's a difference. Is there? I asked, hating how my voice cracked. Because from where I'm standing, it feels like you want me to give up my independence, my space, my life, and just fold myself into yours. That's not what we're asking, Vivian said, but there was a hint of doubt in her voice now. Is that really how we've made you feel? I sank back onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. I don't know. Maybe I'm projecting. Maybe I'm scared because this is all so new and intense, and I don't want to mess it up by moving too fast. They exchanged one of their silent communications, then both sat on either side of me. I'm sorry, Sloane said quietly. We're not trying to pressure you. We love you, Madeline. And it's hard, only having pieces of you when we want everything. The confession hung between us, the first time either of them had said those words directly. I love you too, I whispered. Both of you. That's what makes this so terrifying. Vivian took my hand, lacing our fingers together. Then let's figure this out together. What would make you feel comfortable moving in? What boundaries do you need? We talked for hours that night, negotiating and compromising, building a framework for our relationship that would work for all three of us. They agreed I could keep my apartment for another 6 months, having a space that was just mine to retreat to when I needed it. I agreed to spend at least 5 nights a week at the penthouse, giving us the consistency they needed. We established communication protocols, ways to check in with each other about needs and boundaries. By the time they left that night, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. We'd had our first real fight and come out stronger for it. 2 weeks later, I moved most of my belongings into the penthouse. The apartment I kept, I turned into a small office space where I could work on personal projects. But the penthouse became home, the place where I felt most myself, most complete. The physical intimacy deepened as well. Now that we were living together, there was no holding back. They made love to me frequently, sometimes together, sometimes individually, learning every inch of my body and teaching me theirs. The heat between us never dimmed, our connection growing stronger with every shared moment. 6 months after moving in, during one of my heat cycles, everything changed. This time I was prepared, with both of them there to help me through it in the comfort of our home. The pleasure was just as intense, but without the fear and confusion of my first heat, I could fully appreciate what we were creating together. It was during the peak of my heat, when I was trembling in their arms, desperate and complete, that Vivian asked the question. Madeline, can we claim you? Truly claim you, with our marks. I looked between them at these two impossible alphas who had become my entire world and felt no hesitation. Yes, please. Yes. Vivian's teeth sank into my scent gland first, right at the junction of my neck and shoulder, as I crested my peak. The bond snapped into place like a key turning in a lock, sudden and overwhelming and perfect. Through it, I could feel her fierce protectiveness, her deep well of emotion that she kept carefully controlled, her absolute devotion to me. Minutes later, Sloane's teeth found the other side of my neck, and a second bond formed, equally strong. I felt her playful warmth, her unwavering loyalty, her complete and utter love. And they felt me, my trust in them, my love, my surrender to this bond we created. The three of us collapsed together, breathing hard, the fresh marks on my neck burning in the best possible way. Through our new connection, I felt their satisfaction, their joy, their relief that I was finally, irrevocably theirs. I'm never letting you go, Sloane murmured against my hair. Neither am I, Vivian added, her hand splayed possessively over my stomach. Good, I said, smiling through happy tears. Because I'm never leaving. A year after the elevator incident, we stood in that same car, dressed in formal attire for the company's annual gala. Vivian had her arm around my waist, Sloane's hand rested possessively on my lower back, and I wore my mating bites with pride, the marks visible above the collar of my gown. Can you believe it's been a year? I asked, looking around the space where everything had changed. Best malfunction that ever happened, Sloane said with a grin. Vivian leaned down to whisper in my ear. The elevator didn't malfunction, Madeline. I triggered the emergency stop. I jerked back to stare at her in shock. What? She had the grace to look slightly sheepish. Your pheromones in the lobby, the way you moved, the subtle sweetness in your scent. I knew you were close to presenting, even if you didn't. And I couldn't let you walk away before we found out if you were ours. Sloane was grinning broadly now. Oh, this is good. Vivian, the control freak, couldn't control herself long enough to let fate work naturally. I punched Vivian's shoulder, though I couldn't keep the smile off my face. You manipulative alpha. What if I'd presented as a beta after all that? Then I would have apologized profusely and let you go, she said simply. But I knew, Madeline. The moment you stepped into this elevator, I knew you were ours. I just helped fate along a little. A little? I laughed, shaking my head. You trapped us in a broken elevator during my first heat. And it worked, didn't it? Sloane pointed out, pulling me into her arms. You can't argue with results. I looked between them at these two impossible alphas who had somehow become my entire world, and felt nothing but gratitude for that broken elevator, for Vivian's manipulation, for every twist of fate that had led me here. No, I agreed, rising on my toes to kiss first Sloane, then Vivian. I really can't argue with the results. The elevator dinged, announcing our arrival at the ballroom level. The doors opened to reveal a room full of people, colleagues and competitors, and everyone who had watched our relationship develop. I straightened my shoulders, felt the steadying presence of my mates on either side of me, and stepped forward into our future together. 2 years after the gala, we made the decision to start a family. The conversation had started casually, one night over dinner, but quickly became serious when we realized all three of us wanted the same thing, a child, someone to love and raise together, to pass on our legacy to. The process was more complicated than I'd expected. As an omega bonded to two alphas, my body could potentially carry a child from either of them, but we wouldn't know which until after birth. Some bonded triads chose to use medical intervention to ensure they knew paternity from the start, but we decided to let nature take its course. My doctor explained that my next heat cycle would be the ideal time to try for conception. Both Vivian and Sloane would need to be present, and my body would essentially choose which alpha seed would take root. The explanation made me blush furiously, but both of my mates took it in stride, already planning how to make the experience as comfortable as possible for me. When my heat arrived, it was different from the previous cycles. Knowing we were actively trying for a child added a layer of emotional intensity to every touch, every joining. Vivian held me tenderly as she filled me, whispering promises about the family we'd built. Sloane was equally reverent, her hands caressing my stomach as if she could already feel our child growing there. 6 weeks later, the pregnancy test came back positive. I stared at the little plus sign, tears streaming down my face as the reality sank in. We were going to be parents. I was carrying our child. Telling Vivian and Sloane was one of the most beautiful moments of my life. I'd planned an elaborate reveal, but the moment they walked through the door that evening, I couldn't contain myself. I'm pregnant, I blurted out, holding up the test. The joy on their faces was incandescent. Vivian swept me into her arms, spinning me around carefully before setting me down and dropping to her knees to press her forehead against my still flat stomach. Sloane joined her, both of my alphas kneeling before me, hands splayed over where our child was growing. From that moment on, they were impossible. Vivian researched every aspect of omega pregnancy, buying every recommended book and supplement. Sloane baby-proofed the entire penthouse when I was only 8 weeks along, declaring she wanted to be prepared. They both insisted on accompanying me to every doctor's appointment, holding my hands during ultrasounds, asking the doctor countless questions. The first trimester was rough. Morning sickness hit me hard, leaving me exhausted and nauseated for weeks. Vivian adjusted her work schedule so she could be home more often, bringing me crackers and ginger tea when the nausea was at its worst. Sloane learned to make bland foods that my sensitive stomach could handle, patiently trying different recipes until she found ones I could keep down. At 12 weeks, we had the ultrasound that revealed the gender. A girl. Our daughter. We all cried in that darkened examination room, watching her tiny form move on the screen, her heartbeat steady and strong. Choosing a name became our favorite evening activity. We'd sit together, tossing out options, debating the merits of various names. Vivian wanted something classic and elegant. Sloane preferred more unique choices. I mostly just wanted something that felt right, that would suit our daughter no matter who she grew up to be. We finally decided on Lily Rose Ashford, a name that satisfied all of our preferences. Lily for her strength and beauty, Rose for the flowers that had marked so many important moments in our relationship, and Ashford because she would carry both of her mother's names. The second trimester brought relief from the nausea and a surge of energy. My body began to change in visible ways, my stomach rounding with our growing daughter. Vivian loved to place her hands on my belly, feeling her kick and move. Sloane would talk to her for hours, telling her stories about the world she'd soon enter, promising her all the love and protection we could give. But it was also during this time that the reality of our situation fully hit me. I was going to be a parent. Me, the quiet accountant who had barely known how to take care of herself, was going to be responsible for another human life. The weight of it was overwhelming. One night, I broke down crying in the bathroom, overwhelmed by fears I hadn't voiced. Vivian found me there, gathered me into her arms, and let me sob out all my anxieties. What if I'm not good enough? I gasped through tears. What if I don't know how to be a mother? What if I mess everything up? You won't, she said firmly. Madeline, you're one of the kindest, most caring people I've ever met. Our daughter is lucky to have you as her mother. Sloane joined us, adding her reassurance. And you're not doing this alone. We're a team, the three of us. Whatever challenges come, we'll face them together. Their steady confidence helped shore up my own. They were right. I wasn't alone in this. We were building this family together, and together we could handle anything. The third trimester was physically challenging. My belly grew large and heavy, making simple tasks difficult. I couldn't see my feet anymore, couldn't tie my own shoes, couldn't get comfortable in bed. But Vivian and Sloane were endlessly patient, helping me with everything from getting dressed to finding a comfortable sleeping position. They also became even more protective, if that was possible. When I insisted on going to work, they arranged for a driver to take me door to door. When I wanted to go shopping for baby supplies, they cleared entire stores in advance so I wouldn't have to deal with crowds. It was sometimes suffocating, but I knew it came from a place of love and concern. At 36 weeks, we had a scare. I started experiencing contractions that were too close together, too intense. The doctor ordered bed rest for the remainder of my pregnancy, concerned about early labor. Those last few weeks were difficult, confined to bed, anxious about every twinge and ache. And then, at 39 weeks, my water broke. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Vivian and Sloane never left my side, taking turns holding my hand, coaching my breathing, offering encouragement and support when I was too exhausted to continue. When I wanted to give up, they reminded me why I was doing this, who I was doing this for. And then finally, after one last enormous push, Lily Rose entered the world. Her cry was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The nurse placed her on my chest, and I looked down at her perfect little face, her dark hair, her tiny fingers, and felt my heart expand in ways I hadn't known were possible. She's perfect, Vivian whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Absolutely perfect, Sloane agreed, tears streaming down her face. 3 months later, we got the paternity results. Genetically, Lily was Vivian's daughter. But as we sat together in our living room, passing our baby between us, watching her smile and coo, I knew the biology didn't matter. She was ours, all of ours. Created by our love and bound by our bond. 5 years later, I stood in the nursery we'd prepared for our second child, one hand resting on my swollen belly. Yes, we decided to do this again, unable to resist the pull of adding another member to our family. This pregnancy had been easier, my body knowing what to expect, my mind more confident in our ability to handle whatever came. Vivian and Sloane had been just as protective this time, but I'd learned to set better boundaries, to insist on maintaining some independence even while accepting their care. It was a balance we'd perfected over the years, learning to compromise and communicate, building a relationship that worked for all of us. But standing here now, feeling our son kick against my palm, I understood their fierce protectiveness because I felt it too. This tiny life we'd created together, he was the ultimate proof of our bond, the physical manifestation of everything we'd built. Vivian appeared in the doorway, her expression softening the moment she saw me. "How are my two favorite people?" she asked, crossing to wrap her arms around me from behind, her hands covering mine on my belly. "3 favorite people," I corrected with a smile. "Don't forget Lily." "Never," she murmured, pressing a kiss to my neck. "She's at her music lesson right now. Sarah's bringing her home in an hour." "We're perfect," I said, leaning back against her solid warmth. "Your son is very active today. I think he's trying to kick his way out early." Vivian chuckled, her hands rubbing gentle circles on my swollen stomach. "Patience, little one. You've got another month before you meet us." Our son kicked particularly hard at the sound of his mother's voice, making us both laugh. "He recognizes you," I said softly. "Just like Lily did." The past 5 years with Lily had been the most challenging and rewarding of my life. She was strong-willed and curious, with Vivian's sharp intelligence and Sloane's playful nature. She'd inherited her blonde hair from me, but her gray eyes were pure Ashford. Watching her grow and learn, teaching her about the world, loving her with every fiber of my being, it had changed me in fundamental ways. Becoming a parent had made me braver, more confident. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to stand firm in my decisions, to balance the needs of multiple people I loved. It hadn't always been easy. There were sleepless nights and toddler tantrums, disagreements about parenting approaches, and moments of overwhelming doubt. But we navigated it all together, supporting each other, learning as we went. And now, we were about to do it all again with a new baby. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. Would we have enough love for 2 children? Would Lily be jealous? How would we manage the logistics of 2 little ones? But every time I felt those fears rising, I remembered how far we'd come. We'd built something beautiful and strong, a family that could weather any storm. One more child would only add to that strength, not diminish it. "She's going to be a handful," I predicted, thinking about our daughter with 3 parents who were all strong-willed. "She already is," Vivian corrected with affectionate exasperation. Yesterday, she informed me that she's decided to become a marine biologist and asked if we could turn the pool into an ocean habitat for sharks. I laughed, imagining the conversation. "What did you tell her?" "That we'd start with goldfish and work our way up," she replied, her tone dry but warm. "She's negotiating for a koi pond now." Sloane appeared in the doorway, still in her work clothes, her tie loosened and blazer slung over one shoulder. "There's my family," she said, her voice filled with joy. She crossed the room quickly, adding her embrace to Vivian's, sandwiching me between them in the way that always made me feel safest. "How was your day?" I asked, tilting my head back to look at her. "Long, but worth it," she said, leaning down to kiss me softly. "Every meeting, every contract, every exhausting negotiation is worth it when I know I'm coming home to this." She knelt in front of me, pressing her ear against my belly, listening for her son's movement. "Hello in there," she said softly. "Your mothers are very excited to meet you. Your sister too, though she's a little nervous about sharing her toys." Our son responded with a flurry of kicks, as if he could hear and understand. Sloane laughed, placing her hands on either side of my stomach. He's going to be a fighter, just like his mother's. I hope he has my temperament, I said wryly. Someone in this family needs to be the calm one. You're plenty calm, Vivian assured me. You're the anchor that keeps us all grounded. The doorbell rang, announcing Lily's return. I heard her excited chatter before she even entered the apartment, telling Sarah about something she'd learned in her lesson. Then small footsteps thundered down the hallway, and our 5-year-old daughter burst into the nursery. "Mama," she exclaimed, launching herself at me. Sloane caught her mid-flight, redirecting her enthusiasm into a gentler hug. "Careful, sweetheart. Mama's belly is very big right now. You don't want to hurt your baby brother." She immediately gentled, placing her small hands on my stomach with exaggerated care. "Sorry, Mama. Sorry, baby brother." She leaned close and whispered, as if sharing a secret, "I'm going to teach you everything when you come out. How to tie shoes and read books and everything." Tears pricked at my eyes. I had no doubt she would be an amazing big sister. "That sounds perfect, darling. He's very lucky to have you." That evening, after Lily was tucked into bed with a story from each of her mothers, the 3 of us sat together in our bedroom. It had become our ritual, this quiet time after Lily slept, when we could just be together without the demands of work or parenting or the outside world. "Do you ever think about that day in the elevator?" I asked, my head resting on Vivian's shoulder while Sloane rubbed my swollen feet. "Every day," Vivian admitted. "Best decision I ever made, stopping that elevator." "You mean best manipulation," I teased, but there was no real heat in it. I'd long since forgiven her for orchestrating our first meeting. "I prefer to think of it as fate-assisted matchmaking," she replied primly, making me laugh. Sloane looked up from her task, her gray eyes soft in the lamplight. "I think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't walked into that elevator, Madeline. If we'd never found you, never known what it felt like to be complete." Her words settled something in my chest, a reminder of how far we'd come from that terrifying, overwhelming day 6 years ago. We'd built this life together, through challenges and triumphs, through heat cycles and business crises, through pregnancy scares and toddler tantrums. And through it all, our bond had only grown stronger. "I wouldn't change anything," I said softly. "Not a single moment. Every challenge, every fear, every doubt, it all led us here. To this family. To this love. To this life." "Neither would I," Vivian agreed, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Not a chance," Sloane added, finishing with my feet and crawling up the bed to join our embrace. We lay there together, the 3 of us, and the child growing inside me, connected by bonds that went deeper than biology, stronger than any force that might try to separate us. This was my family, my home, my everything. As the sun set over the city, painting our nursery in shades of gold and amber, the 3 of us stood together, hands intertwined over our growing child, bound by love and fate and one very fortunate elevator malfunction. And I wouldn't change a single moment of it. The end.